Alrighty, about time we had to talk about the Cold Steel Trailmaster in 01 steel. This will be sort of the first review. So durability will be something that comes up over the next, months or so, I guess. I've taken it out, I've used it, I've cut things with it, and that is exactly what this knife is for cutting things, chopping things, just having fun with. 9.5 inch long blade, which is huge. Let's have a look at that compared to a Falcon F1, which is not a huge knife. So you see the blade of the Falcon is eclipsed by just the tip of the knife, and in fact the whole Falcon is eclipsed by the blade of this knife. So very, very large knife indeed. It weighs 17.5 ounces, it's 5/16 of an inch thick, so it is one of the thickest knives I've ever handled. It has a nice brass guard, has a Crayox sheath. It's a really, really fun and well-made knife. There's the facts. What do I like about it? Alright, this is a full flat grind. Did I mention 01 steel? 01 steel, which is a high carbon steel, so not a stainless knife. Full flat ground, sharp spine. Not the sort of thing I'd be throwing sparks off of. Probably not sharp enough for that. Crayox handle, nice and rubberized. Lanyard hold there. What do I think of this knife? Well, there is a lot of good to say about the knife. I'm really enjoying it so far. What do I like? I like the giant blade. The giant blade slices and cuts and chops about as well as you'd expect something this big and this heavy to do so. Even though it's a really thick knife, because it's again got that nice long face here, they can get that down to a pretty nice edge, pretty thin edge really. So it really does chop and cut and make sort of nice neat slashes and things really, really well. So I'll just roll some footage of me playing around with the knife, doing all sorts of things, chopping watermelons. I think I had a few goes at that. It was fun at the very least. Imagine that's someone, some zombie skull perhaps. Chopped some water bottles. I chopped some corn on the cob. It's quite tough stuff, for a vegetable. It's quite a dense core. That was, interesting. It's my accuracy, my hand-eye coordination isn't the best, but, I did those things. I stabbed it into a log and threw an apple at it, and the apple sort of splits across the face of the blade, so that was cool as well. Really, really good stuff. And then, of course, I went out and did some wood work with it as well, and that blade does certainly cut wood. It cuts wood very well. I just did a bit of light limbing on a tree that's out the back that's marked for death. It's kind of become my testing tree until I get to pulling it out, yanking it out. So that was cool, did really well on that. It's a very, very sort of fine-edged cutter, so it does put some really nice sort of V slices into the wood, nice and neat sort of thing, a neat chopper, which is good. I was wondering about the weight. I thought, the sweet spot of these knives is usually about here, but it's a bit lighter at the tip, but I found from here to here was pretty good choppings anyway. It is just such a big heavy knife, you'd have issues if you didn't manage to get this through. The branches that I was doing were fairly small. Still not really advocating using this to cut down huge limbs or trees or anything like that, but for trail clearing, perhaps being a trail master, perhaps, you might find this knife pretty useful. Then of course I took it and did some rudimentary splitting as well, and just wood carving, all that sort of stuff, and just to test the blade, and the blade held up really, really well. Then I went to dull the blade and see how I could bring the edge back. So to dull the blade, I chopped into a hank of manila rope, which, as you'd expect, dulled it almost completely, and then I hammered and put the knife into the log again and used a full length of manila rope to dull the blade by rubbing it up and down, up and down, up and down. And this high carbon tools still like that, they generally don't stand up too well to manila rope. In fact, nothing apart from the really high super steels really puts up much of a struggle against manila rope because it's really rough, abrasive stuff. And yeah, sure enough, it wasn't shaving hair anymore, and its work on paper was getting a bit lax too. So, good news was, a bit of time on the strop, stropped it a bit, up and down, back and forth, and it was shaving hair again. So, 01 steel is a good field user, in my opinion, on this knife. Anyway, so very, very happy with that steel. I like the handle. I think the handle is pretty good. It fits my hand pretty well. I've got some space at the end, so it's, if I do need to make some adjustments, can move up and down a little bit. The flare at the end could be a little bit wider perhaps to secure that in, but I didn't have any issues with it trying to come out of my hand. So I'm really, really happy with that. I think it is the grippiness. It's nice and grippy. And it's really rather comfortable. So those are the things I really like about the knife. Things I would change about the knife, I don't think it needs this big guide. I'd at least cut this off here. I'd do it myself, but then I think it'd look really ugly. So it is just more of a fun knife. So I don't intend on using this like my Falkniven A1, taking it out and probably surviving with it. You probably could, but I'm not going to make any modifications to it. I'm just going to enjoy it as it is. Just take it around when I want to have a bit of fun, and perhaps do some heavier, larger work with a knife if I didn't feel like bringing an axe. So the guard I'm not really fond of it from either sense, from either an appearance sense or a practicality sense. You can get your finger over it if you wanted to carve a spoon with this knife, but I wouldn't be carving spoons with this knife. Another thing I dislike is the general scariness of it. It's certainly a blade that probably only people who watch my YouTube channel and people of like minds would really see the appeal in. Most other people would just think this is ridiculous and just a bit too intense. Even taking this out on a camping trail, people would just think, well, why don't you just bring a machete or an axe? It's kind of like that. It is a bit of a Crocodile Dundee stereotype kind of knife, so perhaps not the best to bring around on to trips with perhaps non-knife people. I don't know. That's really about it. That's about the only things I really dislike about it. It's for what it is. You know, you're not buying this knife surely thinking it's going to be like a serious, I don't know, maybe, I didn't buy this knife thinking it's a serious survival knife. I think it's strong, and I think it probably is fairly tough, but then I guess another thing I could probably knock it on is that, as far as I'm aware, it is a bit of a stick tang. So I think the tang goes all the way to this lanyard hole. I think that's maybe even around it. But it's definitely, I mean, as you can see, it's got that K-bar thing where the blade's really wide and then it has a shoulder here. And then I think it'd have to have another shoulder here to get at least a couple of millimeters of Crayex around it. So, but being that thick, probably is still very, very unlikely to just snap off. However, we've all seen the pictures. This join here, they have stopped pressing, so perhaps that's why they're just doing this laser etching here now. Maybe that was what was doing the weakness, but even still, there are probably a few real stress points. This wouldn't be as tough a knife as perhaps a K-bar BK9. Overall though, I got this knife for $150, which is a really, really good deal. The SK5 one usually sells for about $190 in Australia, the 01 one for about $300, and the Sanmai VG10 one for about $490. So this is the one to get if you can get it for that price. Get it, have fun with it. It's the same reason you buy, you know, nice cars and things like that. You know, you buy a two-door sports car because you want to have fun in your car, not because you want to lug your kids around and go on road trips. It's just one of those things, that one of those purchases you make to just for purely fun reasons. And this one is sort of, it's surrounded by a little bit of practicality as well. So still not a, you know, super, you know, practical SE, you know, jungless or something like that, but it's got enough credit in it to be able to make it sort of a reasonable prospect for being both a fun, super cool woods tool and also a just a, you know, flashy, fun collection piece. So there you go. Cold Steel Trailmaster in 01. I would suggest getting one, especially at the price that I paid. Thanks for watching, dudes. See you in the next video. Hold the phone. I didn't talk about the sheath. I always forget to talk about the sheaths, usually because they're on my hip and not on the table. The Crayex sheath for this, it's about as good as the Cold Steel Crayex sheaths. Apparently they can blunt knives a little bit if you draw the knife against them, because it does have a bit of fiberglass in it. So just keep that in mind. I think it's about as good as you'd expect. It's got drainage hole. It retains the knife well, of course, and it's you know, comfortable enough to wear. The knife doesn't poke too far at my hip. And another thing I'd probably just suggest, if that tip is probably a little bit fighty, so I mean, that's just, again, the intention of the knife isn't to be particularly one super tough bush tool. It is more of a fighting, ultra heavy duty soldier knife perhaps, so that's a bit sharp on the back there. So if you are planning on using this as your, you know, your one big log splitter, that might bother you a bit as well. Sorry, one little final forgotten thought. I thought best of one though. Anyway, take two, have a nice night. See you all later.